Today's our second budget workshop. I'm sorry. What now? All right, we're good. Today is the second budget workshop for getting us ready for fiscal year 2024. And it's a means of this work is to give the council information and to allow the council to give feedback on that information regarding how we advance our strategic priorities and key initiatives. And it's also an opportunity for us to really look at how are we going to allocate funding and how much funding we have to allocate. So before we begin, let's start with our introductions. We'll start with Ms. Smith.
Good afternoon, Teresa Smith, CFO.
Ryan Bergman, Budget Director.
Malcolm Graham, District 2.
Marcus Jones, City Manager.
Vi Lyles, Mayor.
Braxton Winston, Mayor Pro Tem.
Renee Johnson, District 4.
Okay, so I was going to ask Mr. Mitchell, as the Vice Chair of Government and Budget, whether or not he had any remarks that he would like to make. Mr. Mitchell, as Vice Chair of the Budget and Governance Committee, do you have anything that you want to have us kick off or statement around?
If I could, Mayor. If I could, Mayor, thank you. The Budget Committee, we worked out the workshop schedule in the January timeframe that's on our docket today. We will receive an economic outlook from our city economists. We will talk about compensation and staffing for our workforce. And we will hear from our 3 municipal service districts director to get an update on the status of our financial partners. Finally, I think everyone sees Ms. Charles here. We will hear from the Water Department on their water and stormwater outlook. And a reminder to everyone, we added 2 new initiatives, the Digital Divide and Small Business, Minority Business Development. Thank you, Mayor. Look forward to the conversation.
All right, thank you. So now I'll turn it over to the manager and Ms. Katie for the beginning of our work today.
So, Mayor, I started off talking to Councilmember Mitchell, and he said we may get out of here at an expedited time period, so I'm not going to take any time. I'm just going to turn it over to Ryan.
All right. Ryan?
Works, thank you. We have our city economist here. He presented to you at the annual strategy session a little over a month ago. So he's going to talk a little bit about economics, but this time we're going to take it one step further and talk about what that actually means for our city revenue sources and what we use to operate the city.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. So I'll just go ahead and kick off with the presentation. So back at the annual retreat, that was back in January, I presented a very bleak situation on the economy. I think that was on a Monday. On Friday, the Bureau of Labor Statistics released their employment report, which showed that we had a very strong labor market. So that employment report for January showed that the unemployment rate reached a 54-year low at 3.4%. That's like the lowest unemployment rate we've seen over the last 50 years or so. A lot of economists were forecasting that the gain in employment for January was going to be around 200,000. It came in at an overwhelming 517,000. Again, just still talking about the strength of the labor market. But digging deep into those numbers, we realized out of that 517,000, some of it was attributed to a warm weather in January. So if you look at the past 20 years, the month of January was like the 6th. January of this year was the 6th warmest in the past 20 years. So all of those construction workers, oil and mining, and these drilling workers that work outside, they usually have a seasonal fire in the cold months, but that was not the case in January. So that's what kind of helped with that number, the 517,000 you see over there. In terms of labor force participation rates, it's still relatively low compared to what we saw, to levels we've seen before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, it was right around 63, 64%. So we're still somewhat low in terms of labor force participation. Again, that just tells you that labor supply is kind of tight. In terms of like the average hourly earnings, again, this is comparing for the month of January of this year to the month of January last year. We saw that the average hourly earnings for workers was 4.4%. It's also good to note that even though a 4.4% growth seems kind of high, back in November, it was like 5.6%, that growth. It declined in December to like 4.6%, and now we're at 4.4%. And I'll tell you that what the Federal Reserve has been trying to do is raise interest rates to help reduce that cost of employment, that employment cost. And so you could see that some of their efforts have been producing some results, and we're seeing a decline in earnings. When you look at the initial unemployment insurance claims, this is for the week of February 25th, because this is released every week. For the week of February 25th, when you look at the 4-week average, you see that we're at about 193K. And that's relatively about the levels we saw before the pandemic, which is relatively good. However, I'll tell you that just looking at massive layoffs in the month of January, when you look at massive layoffs in the month of January, and you compare that to January of last year, massive layoffs has more than doubled. So when these massive layoffs, usually when they occur, these employees that are laid off get some severance packages, so you do not really see them in that initial unemployment insurance claims numbers. But again, if we're seeing these high, massive layoffs going forward, then we should expect to see these initial unemployment insurance claims go up in the near future. So again, what we're seeing is the Bureau of Labor Statistics just released their job openings and labor turnover survey, which looks at job openings, hiring, firing, and all of that stuff. That was released about 2 days ago. It shows that the job labor demand is really high relative to labor supply. Again, labor demand is just, again, job openings. But again, so like when I talk about the labor market being strong, back in December, there were about 11.8 million job openings. In January, which is the latest data which we've had, that number fell by about 400,000. So we're now at about 10.8 million. So job openings has declined. However, it's still relatively high. But then again, we're seeing some softening in the labor market. So I think I showed this slide at the annual retreat back in January, and I'm just revisiting it again, because what I've showed you in the previous slide, we just talked about the labor market. That's just one sector of the economy. So what you're looking at is the leading economic indicators index. So this is produced by the Conference Board, and it's a broader way of looking at the economy. Rather than just looking at the labor market, this index is made up of about 10 different components that are used to predict the direction the economy is going. Well, they're called leading economic indicators because they help to tell us what's going to happen with the economy in the near future. So this index has housing indicators, it has the financial market indicators, it has labor market indicators. So it's like a broader measure. So we just talked about the labor market being strong, even though it's cooling. But now when you look at the LEI, also the leading economic index, when you look at it, it's declined for the past 11 months. So you could see, so you see it's declined for the past 11 months, it's been declining. And you see a little bump in January. That's that labor market effect. So the decline, it didn't continue declining, even though there was a decline. I mean, it fell. So the rate fell by about 3.6%, but when you annualize it, it's like 7.2%. So that's what we're seeing here. So another point to note is, if you look at this labor market the labor market in this leading economic index, every time it falls below 4, you see the shaded area? There's a recession. Every time it falls below -4, a recession. It fell here, there was a recession. Right now, we're showing that it's falling below that -4%. That does not 100% tell us that we're gonna see a recession, but it's a very strong predictor. So since 1959, we've seen that index drop by that -4%. It did that 7 times since 1959, but there was no recession. But a lot of times when we've actually seen that drop below -4%, there's been a strong evidence that we get to see a recession. So just following up on that, let's go now to our actual forecast. So what you're looking at is a general fund sales tax revenue forecast, and drawing on all of that information, which I just went through. I came up with three different scenarios for sales tax. Again, sales tax is very volatile with the economy, so I came up with 3 different scenarios. So I have an optimistic case. The optimistic case just tells us we do not fall into a recession, but there's some sort of a soft landing. So there's some sort of the economy just corrects itself, basically. We have a base case scenario where it's a mild recession. And I'll just add that the banks, most of the banks, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, they're all predicting a mild recession in the later half of this year. And in my pessimistic case scenario, I have a deeper than mild recession. So based off of that, so if you look at that, so back in, so last year when we were actually doing our forecast for 23, for this year, we had our budgeted sales tax at 129. Right now, my projection for 23 is at 139. So please take note that a lot, just given the way our budget cycle works, like right now we've had just about 5 months of sales tax data for fiscal year 23. So I have to forecast what we're gonna end FY23, and then, so I have about 18 months of data that I have to predict in order to forecast for fiscal year 24. So for our property taxes, we find ourselves in a reval year. So during revaluations, we're required to get a revenue neutral rate for property tax. And so basically, so what we're doing here is we're showing you for since the last revaluation. So the last revaluation took place in fiscal year of 20. So between 2020 and 2021, we're saying the the total assessed value increased by 3.62%. For 22, it increased by 2.06%. And for 23, the increase was 3.18%. So the state law requires us to calculate the average annual growth rate since the last revaluation, which is 2.96%. And so basically for fiscal year 24, we're raising revenue, the property tax revenue, by 2.96%. So in terms of dollar figures, that's about 15.3 million over our 23 budget. So based on all of that information, we expect our current forecast or current projection for 24, we expect revenues to increase by about almost 30 million, that's 29.6 million, which represents a 3.8% revenue growth. This is somewhat atypical because in the previous years we've had we've seen a revenue growth of about 4%, 4.5%. With that, I'd hand it to Ryan.
Thanks, Indem. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to take the revenue forecast and start to show a little bit on the expenditure side of where we are. So the only way to do that before we have compensation discussions or a recommendation is to talk about scenarios. Starting with the revenue, as Indem said, 3.8% growth is certainly light from where we've been the last couple of years at this point. We've been closer to 4.5 to 5, if not higher. The biggest difference is in sales tax. Last year, our sales tax growth in the budget was 19 million. So that's one of the big issues on the revenue side. But then the other issue is that next box, the first expense box. What this is our growth just to keep the lights on, keep doing what we're doing with the same service levels without giving a single dollar to employees or adding any services. So typically, this would be $7 or $8 million less than this. Just like many other things we deal with, the costs have been going up in healthcare, risk funds, retirement and other benefits, and then maybe more importantly, contractual inflationary costs that we need to build into departments' budgets to basically maintain the same level of services. Moving on to the next one, what this is the cost if you take everything I just said and add what we would call a typical recent salary increase. So this would be like a 3% general employee salary increase. It would be 1.5% plus a step increase for public safety employees. I say recent because this, of course, is not what we did last year, where due to CPI and some other factors, we did take a more aggressive stance on salaries. So that's what the third box is. If we duplicate last year's salary increase, that is the expenditure growth that we would currently be looking at. We're going to talk in a second about compensation and staffing in the next presentation, so it's probably important we get that context as well. The other thing I would add is for last year's salary increase, it was really focused on our operating positions. You're going to hear today that it was very successful in a number of ways, and we have the data to show that, which is great news. But areas it wasn't focused on would be public safety at the top step, basically the veteran, police, and fire who had topped out. And you'll see as well from the next presentation that that's one area that we haven't quite stemmed the tide. So with that, you gotta go back up, man. And Deb and I will take some questions.
Thank you. This has been a great way to start off this conversation because it gives us the opportunity to ask questions about the base level of where we're starting and the scenarios which we can expect growth. So, Indem, I guess, I don't know who wants to start this off, but when you talk about all of the labor market and the forecast for everything that we've done, I just want to ask if you see this as consistent in our region for our population, or because I've been hearing on radio shutdowns of places that surround our county and surround where we are, where manufacturing is continuing to be, manufacturing people are being laid off, factories are closing. But I wondered if you could give any example of something that you really are concerned about or what you really think will just be okay.
So again, just looking at the national trends, we're seeing a lot of layoffs in the tech industry, in the manufacturing industry, and I think it's happening here too. So, I mean, in the near future, we should see some softening in the labor market. And so we should see that very likely there would be a rise in unemployment going forward, which is somewhat concerning, again, when it comes to our projections looking into FY2024.
Okay. All right, so Mayor Pro Tem?
So I'm glad you brought that up. I think we're in a bit of a weird place economically, because nobody can really tell what's going on, because I know you looked at history and everything like that, but there's some things that are bucking the trend of history, right? With all that is said, we have one of the historically tightest labor markets that we've seen, and it shouldn't be, given those the recent legacy of the LEIs, right? I think as we kind of try, how do we think about this, right? Like, I think first-time jobless claims or unemployment benefits was printed out today, and it was rose, but it was still just hovering around 200,000 nationally, which is not very high at all. So what that means is that employers, which we are a large one, are competing against each other for labor. So even if we have a softening of the labor market, it's softening from a very low place, especially if the recession is mild. You don't necessarily expect it, to reach 2008 levels per chance, but who knows, right? So as we're thinking about compensation, I'm wondering, do we have data, or can we get it, that kind of benchmarks the industries that we compete against, right? So when you think of, because salaries are continuing to increase, maybe at a slower pace right now. So, I'm thinking about when it comes to law enforcement, what does private security, private corporate policing look like? How do we compare to other municipalities? Thinking about, the folks in Charlotte Water and CDOT, we're competing against the construction market, for some of those, durable trades and talent pools. How do we compare against the people that we're competing against? And I think that's going to be important for us. And, I would hope it's important for the manager as he kind of puts together his suggestions, but definitely important for us to make any type of logical decision about either one of these growth scenarios. So how do we do that? Can we do that? And are we doing that? And what can we kind of expect?
So I think that, Ryan, would you address that?
Yeah, and I think what I would also say is our next presentation, Sheila's coming up for compensation. And so I think we'll tee her up to answer that in a little bit more detail. They do some benchmarking, but we can also try to take it a little bit further in a follow-up on some of the things that you suggested.
Okay. But before we go to the compensation, are there other questions considering after the prior NDEM's presentation and this one for the forecast? Any other questions? Ms. Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to ask, are we considering the other entities around the city or the county as we're considering any tax increases? I know that, I believe that the school board or the county might be proposing a bond or increase. We know there's a reval. If we're considering a sales tax increase, and then we also have to consider that there's a possible imminent mild recession. So I want to make sure that we're looking at the whole picture and the big picture from the residents' perspective. If we're looking at wages or any stagnant wages or layoffs in certain industries, and then on the other hand, we're looking at an increase in property taxes and sales tax. So I just want to make sure that we are in tune of what's going on I know, in the economy, and aware, I'd like to know, as a council member, what are the outside factors that the residents will be facing as we make our decisions as well?
That's an excellent question. Mr. Jones?
So, thank you, Councilmember Johnson. One of the things that we, I believe, have been successful in over the course of the last 5-6 years is we start off the budget this way, and we try to, well, we don't try, we strive to be structurally balanced. So in other words, ongoing revenue to match ongoing expenditures. What Ryan has put out today is basically giving you a few scenarios. If we basically did nothing as it relates to compensation for our employees, all the way up to if we did something that was similar to what occurred in this current fiscal year. What you'll get from the compensation discussion is that we targeted certain groups of employees, and we have some success there. So even to the Mayor Pro Tem's point, as we move forward, we would continue to look at targeting different areas of our employees to make sure that we are having enough individuals to take care of the, I guess, the operations of the city. We also will take into account what's happening, you know, not just in the city of Charlotte, but in the towns and throughout the county. But I do want to make the point that, and I think this is to the Mayor Pro Tem's point, that we really have to think about the provision of services that we have and making sure that we have people that can provide those services. And we have to be extremely competitive in this market. And we hope that it's the total basket of benefits that we provide that would hopefully give us an edge as we're starting to compete for talent. So I hope that addressed both of the questions.
All right. Ms. Watlington? I'm sorry. I did not look up. I just looked at the list and said, Ms. Watlington, Mr. Bakari would also like to speak. Would you like for him to go first?
No, I'm okay.
All right, thank you.
Mine's super quick. I just had a clarifying question. I see the scenario here and I follow the salary increase step changes, but what I'm not super clear about is where the 5.3% and the 6.6% growth, what are the assumptions baked into the scenario on the growth side?
Yeah, so the growth is just a calculation. So that 41.3 million, that represents 5.3% growth off of the current fiscal year general fund budget, which is like 787 million.
So if I look at the slide before, I see 29.6 million projected new revenue, and that translates to the 3.8%.
Yep.
And so I get where you, I think I get where you got this 3.5% growth, or at least that seems that is within the forecast. For these two scenarios to the right, where does that growth come from?
So this is on the expenditure side. So the 41.3 million, I'm just using the middle box. That growth is represented by all of the things in the boxes.
Oh, I see.
Healthcare, retirement, contracts, salary increase, annualization, things like that.
So then what I'm looking at here is, we're in the red essentially for the last two scenarios versus the revenue forecast.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
All right. Mr. Bakari?
Yeah, so for the public who may not know this, and then for anyone new to the budget cycle, the workshops and all this stuff are really about the manager and the staff owning the budget, taking our temperature on some things, and then ultimately handing us the budget at the end of the workshop period with their recommendation. And then it's our budget, and we figure it out from there. Now, one of the things that we traditionally tap dance around is, well, all right, what is that recommendation? I'm not going to go so far as to ask what your final recommendation is right now, but I think we need to be really clear about this conversation. So I'm going to ask the question, am I reading in between the lines correctly here that you are proposing to us, or maybe telegraphing to us, that you're looking for our temperature take on either keeping and not doing recent salary increases to even recent levels, or doing them that will require a tax increase. And I guess the question is there no other alternative for us to reprioritize existing stuff that enables us to do some level of salary increase without a tax increase? And if so, what do we need to do? Because it seems like right now there's a telegraphing of it's either tax increase or no salary increases. And I want to make sure that we have that conversation early and clearly.
Great question. And we also have one more workshop that we'll talk about the reval and things like that. So I guess the best way to answer that is I've got a great team, and we have been able to do a couple things each budget cycle. One, we've been able to reduce expenses. So you'll see certain savings each year, probably in the $3 to $5 million range. And I expect that we'll strive to do that again this year. What's happening, Councilmember Bakari, is that after tightening the belt, it becomes difficult to provide, as you know, Ryan has in that first block, the same level of service with as you tighten. So to race to the end, I'm not saying that immediately that we need to be something other than revenue neutral to get to something similar to last year's salary increase. I will tell you, it'll be difficult. And so I'm not going to propose a budget to you with no compensation increases. And what I'm trying to do is balance, like you said, through these workshops, that level of service that we provide in having individuals to actually perform the service, if that's fair.
I think that's fair. I appreciate that. I think what I would then say in response to that is, in order for this process to be as efficient and effective as possible, we need to, as individual members, clearly articulate to you what our expectations are. And I'll speak for myself here. My expectations are we do the right thing by our employees and make sure that we are competitive and we're a place they want to work, especially from a salary perspective, and it's relevant salary increases, especially where they're needed. Maybe it doesn't have to be across the board, where they are needed to be adjusted, but my deep expectation, normally, but particularly entering the market that we are in, is that has to be done without a tax increase, and that has to be done by prioritizing our existing spends. So I don't know necessarily that everyone believes that, but I think it is important that everyone articulate so you know that expectation from at least 6 people on this body of when you hand us that budget, because that's going to be the most important thing that we discuss in any of these workshops.
Before we debate and talk about that, I want to recognize Ryan to speak to that, because I think that's the gist of this.
Sure. So just to provide a little context with what the manager said, our goal every year when we start a budget process, go through the budget process, is to find a way to not increase taxes. So we're all on the same page there. And we've been successful the last 4 years of not doing so, which, as I mentioned at the retreat, puts us in a company by ourselves for big cities in North Carolina. I'd also say that the reductions that we've been able to do to allow us to do that over the last few years have started to have some diminishing returns. It was about $11 million 3 years ago, $6 million in reductions 2 years ago, and about $5 million this past year. So we're already working through those scenarios department-wide. But I think one other thing that's important to understand when we talk about service levels is the general fund is not where we make our big investments in things like transportation. That's in our capital plan. And so when you look at services we provide in the general fund, once you net out all of the things that are reimbursed, like permitting costs and things we might do for the school system, what you're left with, public safety makes up over 70% of net costs. So if the assumption is that due to increased growth and things like that, we have some limitations there, it does make the puzzle a little bit harder for us at this point.
Yeah, but just in response to that, I appreciate that context. I think the thing we've heard right now is the manager says we can do it easier with a tax increase, and we can do it without a tax increase. It will just be very hard. So again, the guidance from all of us isn't that we're backed into quarter and we only have one option. We have two options. They're both doable, even though hard, and it will be our will as a council whether we raise taxes or not. And from the police department, of course, that's the largest spend. We're operating under full capacity levels at historical levels right now. That's a bit of a different beast than it is in normal years.
All right, Ms. Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd actually like for us to proceed with the compensation conversation that's next, because I think we're having a macro level conversation around salary increases from a peanut butter application of, 3% and 1.5. I like to get, double click in this space so then we can get micro focus on specific areas where we will increase and other areas where we might maintain. So we'll have a strategic approach rather than having a high level macro approach, if we could.
You said that so well. That was
What does peanut butter mean?
where everything is.
Peanut butter means you just spread like
everything
peanut
around, you just
butter,
spread it around.
everything. So we're talking about a 3% increase in general.
We only
like-
use boulders and sand.
Yeah.
But before we start, I just want to say, because the answer that it's either this or that is dependent upon what we provide to this community, where we see growth, where we see, all of the comments have been, I think, on par for what we have to think about. But this is, before some of you came in, we talked about this is the dialogue we need to have with the manager, the questions that we need to have, and we have an accountability, as Ms. Johnson said, to our residents, and to be able to listen and take this information back. We will have another workshop. So I know that this will be, I think it's a hard decision no matter which way we go. Hard is hard. And we are at this point, and as all of this conversation, I think we need to start off with our people. As Mayor Pro Tem said, we need to know where our people are, what they're making, and where we are causing a decline in our service delivery because we don't have people. Those are the kinds of tough discussions we're going to have, and so we'll get to that, and I'm going to turn it back over to the manager to recognize the people that are going to help us be more and better informed about it.
Okay, I'm getting hungry with peanut butter and sandwiches and things like that. But what we'll do is turn it over to Sheila and her team, because we'll have that compensation and staffing conversation now.
Ms. Simpson, welcome to the podium.
Well, good afternoon. So thank you, everyone, for the compensation, staffing, and healthcare. I'm Sheila Simpson. I serve at the pleasure of you as your HR director, and I'm grateful to be here. So I don't think I'll just go straight to the data. Well, maybe not. There we go. There we go. So you just had a lot of healthy dialogue around some very important topics. And this slide is really showing some information that was really showing up last year and the year before. And that is that we started to see significant vacancy rates. And those vacancy rates were occurring in some very critical areas of our organization. And as you can tell in the gray line, that is our hourly workforce. The city of Charlotte has about 75% of our employees work in those jobs. And many of those jobs are the service-oriented jobs. They are the ones who keep our city running. So those are the jobs that are in Charlotte Water. Those are the jobs that are in our rail system. Those are the jobs that are in our solid waste services area. Those are the jobs that's in our Charlotte Department of Transportation Services. Those are many of the jobs in our heavy equipment technician areas. And we started to see many vacancy rates occur. Mayor Pro Tem, you asked a question about where are we losing our employees? Well, the difficulty in answering that question is that when we compare ourselves to our like employers by industry, like employers are other municipalities. We're not losing our employees to other municipalities. We're losing our employees to the private sector. And in that arena, the private sector is very competitive, especially for the jobs that we have and that require certain certifications to perform, such as CDL drivers. That's in that gray bar, CDL drivers. In our Charlotte Water Department, many of our employees leave to work for one of the largest employers in this community. I won't name the employer, but we train our utility techs and our water treatment plant operators, highly skilled individuals. They're in municipalities working for us. They are being attractive, very attractive candidates for other employers. So that's where we're losing them. So that is the answer to your question. We're losing them not to other municipalities, but for other employers in the construction industry, and the other industries that provide utility services to our communities. That's where we're losing them. And then, as you might know, as you read in the newspaper, you can read that last year, and it's a result of some of the COVID, when you have a CDL driver and you can have over-the-road transportation drivers, many of those retailers were very competitive because they needed to move goods, the supply and demand of goods. And so CDL drivers' licenses became very competitive for us. So this is really demonstrating the impact that that had on our organization in that area. So that was reality. A very high vacancy rate in the hourly jobs. And as you can see, we still have a high vacancy rate, as someone just mentioned, in our police sworn area. And we're starting to see an uptick in our general salaried jobs as well. Okay. Now, what did we do last year when we started to see those trends? Well, with your support, we placed a huge investment in our greatest assets. We invested in our workforce. And traditionally, when we approve a salary, when you approve a salary adjustment for the city of Charlotte, traditionally the rate that is approved is around a 3% factor. So that is our typical budget for the hourly workforce. In previous years, we took the 3% and it was distributed in two manners. One was a merit adjustment. Well, I'll start with the market. One was a market adjustment that everyone received. And then the other was an average of 1.5% that many employees received because of their performance. In the salaried workforce, it was a merit adjustment of an average of 3%. And when you think about the public safety, that would be fire and police sworn, they have a market adjustment. And then, depending on where they are in their steps could range anywhere between 2.5% to 5% based on their step. So their average adjustment generally is 4 to 6.5%. Last year, because of the investments that were made, a very strong, aggressive investment of 8% was approved by council and generated for our hourly employees. And the salary employees received a 4% on average. And then police and fire, again, was 5.5% to 8%. But the other things that I would like to highlight is what you see on the bottom. In addition to those things, we did some things that we had not done since my employment with the city of Charlotte. We approved a 2.5% shift differential as a retention incentive for employees, again, the same employees that work in those operations areas that's very important to the services that we provide to our citizens and our residents. 2.5% shift differential was implemented for the very first time. And those who have a CDL license in jobs that and performing duties that we require a CDL license to perform, an additional investment of 2.5% for those employees. And then there was also a one-time lump sum bonus provided to most of our city employees, salary and hourly, of 2%. We paid it in 2 installments. We paid a 1% in July, and we paid another 1% in September. So when you add all of that together, we were over 10% in compensation for our employees in hourly salary workforce, and upwards of 4 to 6% in our salaried workforce. And that was a very aggressive strategy. And it was something that we knew that was needed because, again, our employees were being very sought after by the private sector. Okay. As a result of doing that, you see before you the results of that. If you compare period by period from 21 to 22, when we look at the voluntary resignation rates, where that yellow line is really where the data really shines. And that is in the last quarter of 2022, from July to December, the voluntary resignation rates were down in all categories. So that is a snapshot in time, but it really did lead for us that the investments that was made was having some impact on our ability to maintain and have a steady workforce. And it really did slow down the fast rate of, vacancy rates that we were seeing, and it really did help to slow that down. Now, what you just heard from the economists and what you just heard from your own discussion, what that really means is we did the right things, but we can't stop because the competitiveness still remains. This data tells us what are we doing in terms of our hiring. We track our hiring data and our exit data, and it does demonstrate to us that our hires tend to be up quarter over quarter, period over period. And so our hires are up. Our vacancy rates, as I just showed you, in certain areas were improving. And so we know that we have some very positive things that's happening. But as the economists just demonstrated, we also know that there's still some things that we have to do and be prepared for. And that's this area. If you look here, this is our trend in vacancy rates, and they are trending in the right direction, with one glaring exception: our police sworn area. So that is not new news for you, it's not new news for us, and the reality is that our entrance rate into our sworn positions in police is not growing as fast as our exits. Okay? Our entrants are not growing as fast as the exits. And so that continues to be an area of concern for us and a concern for our community as well. Okay. This slide is really saying the same thing that I just said on the last slide. It's just graphed a little differently with some numbers. So if you look at the far right side, those are our hires. So our hires are going down in terms of those that's making it through in the sworn area, where our resignations and our retirements are ticking up a little bit. And that's in our police area. So with that, that is most of our staffing concerns. This is also related to some of our health care in terms of the budget. And so I would like to turn things over to Christina Fath, who will share information about our health care. Unless we want to pause here, Ryan, should we pause, or you want to keep going? Okay.
Can we let them finish their question and we'll come to the questions?
Okay. All right.
Let's do the
Thank you.
healthcare at the same time.
Okay.
Right.
So Christina.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. It's lovely to see you outside of benefits enrollment season. So I'm going to provide for you a couple of updates on healthcare and start first with some highlights of this past year. The city's commitment to employee health and well-being continues to shine through as we were first place winner of Charlotte's Healthiest Employer for large employers in the region. This is our second year in a row with this title, beating out some unnamed banks, some large hardware stores, and other employers in the area. So something we should certainly be proud of. We also topped the list of 100 healthiest employers in the U.S. So that commitment has certainly been favorable for employees. The second bullet here is around the occupational health program. As you know, several years ago, we implemented a public safety occupational health program that provides services just for police and fire. The fire program has been fully implemented, and this past year, we enhanced the services for police employees so that they could also have a one-stop shop for comprehensive health screenings, cancer detection, behavioral health, there's physical therapy, sleep, et cetera. So just services that are specific to them with providers that specialize in public safety. Mental health has been high on our list for several years now as we try to create a robust mental health program benefit for all employees. This past year, we've increased the access and utilization for first responders to behavioral health services to include counseling and additional education. This is through that occupational health clinic. They're working with counselors that specialize in mental health for first responders. So again, a great addition to the clinic. I would encourage you, if you're at all interested in learning more about the work that the Public Safety Clinic's doing, we'll be happy to provide for you a tour and you can see how that group is serving our employees. And then finally, the enhancements to our financial wellness program over the past year include a variety of different programs. One is the Get Your Ducks in a Row, which is a cheeky name for a program that essentially helps employees get all of their paperwork in order. So their will, their power of attorneys, their beneficiaries, their life insurance paperwork, and get all of that into one place when the inevitable happens. So helping folks with the stuff that's really important but just may not be top of mind. We've also increased retirement stages education. So, one of the best benefits offered here at the city is the retirement plan. And so helping employees understand that benefit, but also helping newer employees understand the value of that benefit earlier on in their career. And then we've done some additional campaigns on emergency preparedness. And as a teaser, one of the things that we are focusing on in this upcoming year is around food insecurity for our employees. So we have identified employees through our health screening process that are food insecure. So they are struggling to afford food ongoing. So we've partnered with some different vendors to do mobile food pantries to provide food for employees that are in need right now, but also connect them with resources to help them with that stability going on forward in the future. And we kicked that off yesterday at Solid Waste, and we're able to help about 100 employees. So again, a lot of really great things that are going on for the employees. This slide will show you our trend over time in terms of healthcare. It gives you that snapshot ongoing. The city is the blue line and the gray line is the national trend. So we do continue to beat national trend, both from medical and pharmacy claims cost perspective. You can see the opening of the on-site clinic has really been the critical pivoted moment where our trend started to go down compared to national trend. And that was, in large part due to council and your approval of that benefit. But you can see that, our costs still do continue to increase, even though we are beating that national trend. Okay. All right. And then finally here, just a high-level snapshot. It's still very early on in the year for us in terms of healthcare expenses and where that's going to go. But as you can see here, that while we are beating national trend, our expenses do continue to increase. This is due to healthcare inflation. So it is likely that additional investments are going to be needed in 2024 in order to maintain the level of services that we currently provide. So we, continue to stay committed to employee health and well-being, as well as aggressively managing those healthcare costs, but they are starting to trend upward for us. So with that, I will turn it over to Ryan.
Thank you, Christina. So we also included a slide. The Budget Committee wanted us to include this slide, which is city council manager forms of governments in the biggest cities in the country. And so this has been shared with you in the past, but what you'll see is the salary, the allowances, the totals adjusted for cost of living. We do have our economist here if there's any questions, but I assure you that this is the same cost of living index we use for all positions in the city when making those types of comparisons. And then finally, just the summary of the presentation and what it means when we're going through budget development. It's fair to say that the focus that we had last year on operations positions has resulted in a reversal in the trend. We've certainly stemmed the tide, but I would say that we are still a few percent higher than we've traditionally been at this point in time as far as vacancies, even in operating positions. So we likely need to continue to work on our end to try to find the right recommended level for the FY24 budget. We're not seeing the same results in police. We are going through, part of it is we're going through a period with high retirements, which goes back to 28, 29, 30 years ago in the growth of the force at that time. And we likely will have at least one more year of those higher levels of retirements before it'll start to come down a little bit. But on top of that, we're still seeing resignations at a higher level, which means that the number of recruits that we're able to attract aren't filling the gaps. And then finally on healthcare, I think Christina covered it. Really, we're signaling that even though we feel we're doing very well in healthcare, benchmarking nationally, just like everything else, there's still some pretty extreme inflation in that area right now, which means that we will need to make an investment just to keep things going. And that investment was already included in some of the budget deficits, budget gaps that we showed in the earlier presentation. So with that, we'll turn it over to you, Mayor, for questions.
All right. I want to, Mr. Jones?
Ryan, you do have some good news as it relates to where we have a laser focus in the 911 call takers.
Yeah.
Ryan, the good news. Come on, come on.
I love being the one to give good news. So I'm sure you all remember the 7-hour nights when we talked about 911 staffing that night. At that point, we were answering 64% of the calls in December, 10 seconds or less. Our benchmark is 90. We just got word from police that in February, we are all the way up to 84%. So 20% higher than we were, not quite there, but we're making a lot of strides. But maybe more important than that, we now have 117 out of 126 telecommunicator positions filled, and there's currently 15 more in the hiring process, which takes a while. So if we don't see a lot of resignations, we're going to be able to get this up to a sustainable level maybe sooner than we thought due to some of the actions that were taken.
Congratulations on that. That shows what I think a focus can be and change. All right. I want to recognize Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, I wanted to go, I guess, with, either slide 6 or 7. Mr. Jones, I know you guys deal with kind of what's definite and not what is possible, necessarily what is possible all the time, when especially dealing with the budget. But recognizing that we have in our legislative agenda, we need some legislative authority to change some of our hiring practices as it relates to police. Chief Jennings is looking at a non-sworn workforce to deal with some current duties that sworn police officers have to deal with right now. Part of the kind of looking for different first response models is that there are some jobs that police do that don't necessarily call for an employee that with that amount of training and that amount of cost, to respond to. Of course, we don't want to kind of prognosticate too far about how successful we'll be, but that legislation at least seems to have some movement, doesn't seem to be dead on arrival. So I would love to, again, as we kind of deliberate over this in the future, see what a scenario looks like. What would the effect, the fiscal and FTE effect be on our police force? I don't know how big that force would be, for instance, right? Are we talking about 5 positions? Are we talking about 20? Are we talking about 50? And how does that kind of, what might we look forward to the effect that would have on one vacancies, right? Because that might be positions that might be a bit easier to hire. That might reduce the need for total FTEs for sworn police officers. And what is the difference in the cost of that civilian corps versus a sworn duty corps? Because I think that could have some short and hopefully definitely some long-term effects on the way we're looking at these curves.
Yeah, yes, Mayor Pro Tem, you're exactly right. I would say that maybe there are 3 legs to the stool, and maybe there'll be a 4th or 5th leg by the time we finish. But going back to Save Charlotte, the plan that this council approved, there are the whole concept of having non-sworn officers non-sworn individuals being able to do some of the things that are sworn are doing. Getting that legislation passed would be very important, and I believe that would be helpful. The chief has focused on also laterals that come in, and so you think about it, that officer has already had the training, and we don't have the number of months that would take to get that officer trained up. And I think that the third one that's equally as important is the chief is having additional recruit classes. So I think we have 70 folks right now that are in a variety of stages of recruit classes. So I always think about it as a spigot, right? And then there's the drain. And if it's draining faster than the water that's coming in, we have a problem. And I think we're going to have to deal with these retirements. Maybe, Ryan, we peak in January of 24, I think. But in the interim, having these non-sworn opportunities, as well as having more water coming out of the faucet, I think actually helps us.
I agree, and again, just thinking about the role that we play in this. I mean, just the points Mr. Bakari often makes, and he made earlier today, and thinking about the temperament of the General Assembly, of being asked, how do you do more without raising taxes, right? So as the council is engaging with the General Assembly and is having these kind of conversations with leaders from across the state, I think that could be valuable information to say, hey, this is how we can do more with less, without raising taxes, if only we had the legislative authority to do that. So those numbers, I think, can be very helpful. If we can do some digging into that, even the sooner the better. All right? Thank you.
Ms. Watlington?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've got a few questions. I'll try to be very quick. The first question is for Sheila. You mentioned this private employer where a lot of our employees are matriculating to.
Yes.
Has there been any thought to contracting out our services to private employers?
So I might need Ms. Charles to help answer me, but we have done some work to help provide some services to those employers. However, we become the recruitment pool. So steering that very delicately, it's beneficial for them to have us invest in the training, and then they reinvest in those that we have trained, if I can just say it that diplomatically.
Okay, and so then that'll lead me to a follow-up question, just in regards to retention and.
Yes.
Oh. I'm sorry, I thought you were about to say something else. Oh, so I'm just wondering, and I know you can't necessarily do it like a tuition reimbursement, and then you have to work for so many years before you can go somewhere without paying it back because it is training. But I would be interested in us exploring what we can do to try to keep those employees on for longer, whether that's career pipeline progression or something that, that would make it more attractive to stay for a while here. The next question I have is in regards to the general fund. So I would imagine this question is for you, Ryan. And it relates to a broader question that I've asked once before, and so I'll ask it again. In terms of the cost of growth, some time ago I asked for those numbers. What does it truly cost us to grow here in Charlotte? Do we have that information?
So it's challenging because every year we do a new budget that incorporates revenue from growth to maintain our current service levels. And then whether or not the additional growth leads us to have to take actions in those service levels is a year-by-year occasion. For instance, fire for 3 or 4 years would basically keep the same service levels despite the growth. But eventually, with more people, more buildings, response times tick up, and suddenly we have to make a $15 million investment and in the building and a fire station and a $2 million investment in staffing for it. And so that year, the new growth would not support the new station or the new operations of the station, but it's a model. So similarly with police, even though we can't necessarily control the number of officers as well, we do track the number of calls, which can increase with new citizens, and we try to, come up with the cost of each citizen on a per-hour basis. But it's not as clean as you'd like it to be, just because you try to have a long-term plan for managing the growth, but each service level will have a different tipping point for when you have to adjust as you go along.
Mm-hmm. I think that makes sense. I think that it's going to be critical for us as we move forward to figure out how to get that analysis done. For however many 100,000 people come to the city, how many more officers does it cost us? How many more firefighters does it cost us? At what point, to your discussion, do we have to make a capital investment? How does that impact us in infrastructure? I don't think we can have these conversations in a way that's going to be effective and move the needle without clearly understanding that, because we have to understand how much more we can take before that tipping point hits in every area. So I know that I've asked it a few times before. We've got to get something in the way of that. We've got to understand that. I think about business incentives and our TIGs and some of our different recruitment and retention incentives. How much does that cost us over the year, right? What are we missing out on in terms of property taxes from our commercial buildings because we've offered incentives? Obviously, we want to figure out what the tools are that we need for that, but we want to make sure that we're getting the bang for our buck in regards to business retention and recruitment. So I'll continue to ask it until I see something closer to us being able to say, we know that we've got to anticipate in the forecast because we expect to grow by this many people, this much capital investment, this much more operating expense because we've got to hire. When it comes to just broader, right? I think part of our issue is that a lot of what we're recruiting are businesses and different things. We got people here during the daytime that work here, but the property taxes are sitting in other counties by virtue of us being a region, right? So we've got to think about how do we structure our tax tools And how do we work across our region to put something together that's gonna work? Because we as citizens of Charlotte can't continue to foot the bill for the whole region when it comes to things like infrastructure, right? And so my question is, for other metros that have this same sort of dense urban core with suburban surrounding communities, how are they managing?
Yeah, so, and that's a big question that we will certainly get back to on.
Sure.
But I do want to point out one key difference. When you leave North Carolina, the growth in value of your properties would typically result in a higher tax bill immediately, even without changing the rate. And I think that's a big distinction between North Carolina and other areas where absent a going above revenue neutral at some point or a tax increase, basically, there's never any inflation on property taxes. You only get revenue from new buildings. So I think that does put us a little bit behind when comparing to some other metros, but we'll certainly try to get you more information on that.
Sure, because to the extent that we can do some sort of cost sharing, I know people don't necessarily like the commuter tax idea, but there's some merit to it, right? So those are the kinds of things that I'd be very interested in understanding what has changed since the last time we've looked at it. On page, or slide 6, you all pointed out that our sworn officers, we see that the vacancy rates continue to rise despite even the pay increase. So that would tell me that it's not just about the pay, which is what we've heard from FOP. Do we have a good understanding of what else we're dealing with that is not a broader cultural kind of issue, if you will?
So I guess I'll take the first crack. Some of the things that we have heard are issues in terms of what may be available in another jurisdiction, but not us, are the changes that we had to retiree health care. That's something that comes up. Take-home vehicles. I think we made some strides with the shift differential this last year, but you're right, there are other issues other than base pay that come up, and some of the ones I just mentioned are some of the things we hear. Ryan, if there's more.
I think longevity pay is another one. And then also, I think one of the impacts that we see is that you can retire in 20 years. It's not, you get your benefits at a reasonable amount of time and reasonable amount of service, whereas other places may have extended beyond the 20 years. But longevity pay and the shorter retirement period, I would see as things that I've heard about that impact it.
Gotcha. Last few, when it comes to our whole total comp, are there any places in the spirit of what Mr. Bakari mentioned before we start to talk about not being tax neutral or revenue neutral, how do we really make sure that we are looking everywhere to try to get as lean as possible? When it comes to underutilized benefits, do we have a good, clear understanding of what we may be offering that isn't necessarily being utilized by the majority of our workforce? And are there ways that we can optimize the package?
So we do look at the utilization of all of the benefits. You know, the city is subsidizing or cost sharing on medical and dental. The other benefits are fully employee paid. And even with those, you know, such as the accident, hospital indemnity, you know, the vision and such, I mean, we're still 60, 70, 80% utilization. So I do think, you know, we have a very robust package, and employees are taking full advantage of what's being provided to them. You know, we do look at our benefits and benchmark against other entities to see what we're missing. And I would say we're very competitive with what's out there, you know, both publicly and privately.
I can attest to that.
And one other thing I'd add is, on the retirement side, we do have kind of requirements from the state that we have to do that doesn't leave us a lot of flexibility, such as separation allowance for police and the pension system, and then even a required level of 401K contribution for police. So some of them are out of our hands.
Gotcha.
Then
Okay.
one more I would add, that we saw in the jobs that we were losing, okay, we saw that those employees were not accessing our education assistance policy as it was formally designed. And so we did an analysis of why is that? And the basic answer to that is because the prior design required you to pay upfront. And so for that workforce, and again, 75% of our workforce, for that workforce, to pay out of pocket upfront was a constraint. So we redesigned the policy to remove that constraint and remove that barrier. And so we now have a partnership, as we articulated in another session, to offset that cost. And the city is paying that cost up front with many of our education assistance programs now, especially for those in that category to try and get certifications, job skills, and we pay that up front now. So we do an analysis on, as Christina said, we look at this, where are our benefits being utilized, but also who's not utilizing them, which sectors of our workforce. And that came out pretty glaringly, and so we made a change there. And we're seeing positive results out of that.
Thank you. And then
Sheila, if you don't mind, one thing that you also discovered in one of the senior leadership team meetings is, you know, we have some of our employees that have issues as it relates to digital inclusion. So if we have all these offerings, but they don't have access to, you know, the internet, so there are things that we're doing to try to address that too.
Thank you. And then finally, I know that, I'm sure that it has been looked at, but I certainly would like to ask about any opportunity to move some of our services to fee-based for the items that are specific to kind of target consumers, if you will.
All right. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Last year, or the previous council, I believe, approved a 360 evaluation for employees. Do we have the update on the status of that, or do we have any results from that survey?
So, Ms. Johnson, I think what you're talking about is that we were bringing in management partners to take a look at some things such as promotions for our employees. And do you know where we are with that, Sheila?
Yes. Management Partners was brought in to do an analysis with us on our promotions and our hiring. And so they recently gave me some preliminary feedback, and this was the basic summary. From a practices standpoint, we fall in line with many of their clients, their book of business. Our practices are very similar in nature. The feedback they received from some of our employees that they talked with was that depending on where they were, some of our employees thought that there were inconsistencies in how the panel makeup was comprised or the hiring practices were being delivered. And then when they asked for additional feedback around that, the glaring subjects that came out the most was questions that our employees had around how do we assess diversity, equity, and inclusion when we're making hiring decisions. So our employees have questions around DEI. How do we measure that? And how does that play into hiring and promotional decision-making criteria? So that's pretty much, in a nutshell, what came out of that. In addition to that, we've done some DE&I work internally, and we provided some information through the Office of Equity and Mobility, and we saw some similar things, that our employees are asking questions around how does diversity and equity show up when positions are being hired for, and or how assignments are provided in certain departments. So a lot of the questions around DE&I, and then the second prong of that is a sense of belonging. So that's what we have from Management Partners thus far.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Simpson. I think that sounds pretty significant. Diversity and inclusion, questions from employees, and consistency. So I'm wondering if council can get a summary of those results, Mr. Manager, and the steps that we're taking to address and improve that?
Yes.
Thank you. Also, do we do an exit interview for employees as they're leaving, resigning?
Yes.
Okay. And do you capture the results for that and summarize that?
Yes, yes, we do. So the employees do that voluntarily, okay? And most of the feedback is compensation and different opportunities, different job opportunities.
Okay. Have we looked at, especially in the professional positions, remote working? And can you give me a remote working environment? I know there are some young professionals that only look for jobs.
Very good question. So again, that is another area to a question that came up earlier from Ms. Watlington. We made a change in that as well. So currently, our current state is that most of our departments, I would say 99% of them, employees have the ability to work 2 to 3 days a week remotely. And it depends on your job sometimes, but on average, in most departments, employees are working remotely, teleworking, 2 days a week, or some of them are at 3 days a week.
And I know we have employees that are essential, and that makes it challenging for us, you know, to balance the morale. However, one thing that the pandemic did prove is that the work could be done remotely. So if that's something that we would consider, it just might be a suggestion in recruiting individuals and maintaining individuals. I know you're the professional, but I just think that that's an opportunity for us to improve some of the retention numbers.
Ms. Johnson, I just want to make sure that every time we have a chance for a PSA to recruit people, we do that. So we allow people, so it's almost like we have 3 buckets of employees. So we have the folks that are, public safety related, that have different shifts and what have you. And then we have our operational folks that the departments have tried their best to be flexible. Maybe they're 4 10-hour work days as opposed to, having 5 days a week. And then for many of our salaried employees, and Renee's in the room, so, as we went through COVID and had some of the CARES funds, we were able to provide, I think, almost 2,000 devices that would allow people to work remotely. So our policy does allow individuals, if I have this right, Sheila, to work up to 3 days a week remotely?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Right, so that's a culture, I think, and an employer's choice. I mean, if they can work, well, I won't get into that, but it's just an option. If you can get the work done for 3 days, that the work can be done. I think it's just a culture and an employer's choice. So it's certainly an option to recruit a different employee. You mentioned, we talked about police staffing levels. Where are we with the fire staffing levels? Where are we with fire? Are we understaffed with in fire?
So the area, I'm glad that, I'm looking at the fire chief. So the area that I can tell you we've had concerns over the past 6 months has been in the alarms. They call it alarms, but it's telecommunicators. Just as it was in police, we saw a similar trend in the fire department. So our concern was in that sector of the fire department. And the other area I think that the chief would probably tell we have concerns in, and that is we do use, using their terminology, hire backs. So that's when you're off duty and we bring you back to duty, and to feel the requirement that we must have so many firefighters on duty at all times. The fire chief is here, but I believe that requirement is 270.
But Ms. Johnson, I think that the point was sworn there's 0.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Ms. Johnson, I think the context I would have for that,
It's
we
0 here.
we don't have the same issues in fire, but part of that context is because we have a Charlotte firefighters retirement system. So unlike our other positions, they can't really leave the system without losing their pension benefits. I mean, they can vest, but if they go somewhere else, they're starting over at 0 in the retirement system. So that's why historically, fire has always been very low vacancies, because we don't really have a whole lot of people leaving other than retiring.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
At
Okay.
100%, I mean, we have no, if the sworn firefighters, we retain.
Wow, that's great. Okay, all right. And then, do you know what percentage of police applicants make it through to the final stage, to actual hiring?
That does vary by class. Generally, I think their attrition rate is 90%, probably on the high side. Sometimes they lose between 10 and 15%.
I worked with the chief, I think last year, and Mr. Manager, you might remember this. There was a graph that I was reviewing with the chief for minority applicants, like where in the hiring process we lost minority applicants. And do you know the percentage of minority applicants that apply, that actually make it through to the graduation rate?
So, Councilmember Johnson, we'll get those numbers for you, but what I do know is that after that, Chief Jennings made a lot of changes to the application process, the hiring process, and I think we've made strides, but I don't want to be wrong, but I know that he was intentional with making some changes.
Okay. And then I want to piggyback off what my colleague said, Councilmember Watlington. I would like to know the cost of growth as well. I think that's the headline for Charlotte. We really need to be tracking that information. You know, I've been talking about the infrastructure for months now, and, you know, I have this map of 20-some pending applications, or excuse me, rezoning applications in the Mallard Creek area alone. And these are pending, not the 20 or so that were approved last year. And and I keep saying this, but if you look at the number, it speaks to the school capacity, and the number 76 to 78% school capacity is listed for Mallard Creek, almost on this whole list, and it's been stagnant since 2021. So we're not capturing cumulative information. We're not capturing current information for our tree canopy. We haven't looked at that since 2019. I asked a question to City Water, are we capturing cumulative information when we're tracking our stormwater capacity? So I think we really, really need to take a look at the cost of growth. We're talking about our police, our EMT. We know there's a hold time. So I think that's an important question that this council needs to consider, the cost of growth. So if you're able to provide the cost of growth based on the infrastructure and the hiring and everything, that's something that we need to know as a council prior to approving the budget. Thank you.
I want to make sure, I think that's a great question. You know, what does it cost to do growth? But I also think that I've seen at least 50 or more formulas on how you do it. And so before the staff dives deeply into it, I think they ought to come back and talk to us about it, because how you define growth, what factors are important. We want to do something that adds value to what we're trying to accomplish and giving us some real facts. So before, Mr. Jones, it's a conversation that we ought to have at this table and have it brought back in a way that we all can understand it. Because I know that there have been a lot of communities that have tried to do this, and you don't know, like, I'll be a really ridiculous one, but what's the value of having, being on television on a national market on a basketball game? Is that a value of growth? Versus what is the value of taxes that are paid, all of that. So I want us to agree on how we do it before we actually assume that we know this is what it is. If that's acceptable to you, so that we can come back and know what we're doing and what it means. In the other communities that surround us, they would say, you're taking away our money because all of our people come and drive across the state line. I don't know the cost of a per mile cost versus what they spend at Costco. which is a city property or that pays taxes inside the city. So I think that let's get the formula that we should use
Could be a
so that
committee
we can do
discussion.
that. However, the committee discussion would be fine. I just want us to all agree on it so that or at least we all talk about what it really means to cost out growth. So with that, I'm going to ask Ms. Johnson okay, thank you. Ms. Anderson's next, followed by Mr. Bakari.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do agree also that we need to decide and agree on the framework of what we mean when we say growth before we ask staff to double click into that, because we want it to be value add to our discussion for sure. I have a couple questions for Ms. Simpson. First and foremost, I'm glad that we are doing sort of the low-hanging fruit around food pantries for employees and thinking about digital inclusion for employees where that is a struggle and an issue in their monthly budget. So I think any sort of low-hanging fruit that we can address in that manner to dampen our vacancy rate, we should absolutely activate those and look into it. But Ms. Simpson, on the second graph, you had mentioned that, we're losing some of our employees to Ms. Watlington's point, a particular private sector. Do we have any indication of the pay delta or the investment that private sector is doing in those
Yes.
employees that we can activate upon?
So the pay delta is generally between 8% to 10% on average.
Okay, got it. I would like for us to look at potentially some opportunities. Maybe there are sweeteners based on how we can keep those employees to stay on. And maybe there's a pay increase, sweetener, et cetera, for a number of years. But I think we do, from an 8 to 10% base pay, and that's significant, right? And
Yes.
so we have to think of other unique areas to address that particular issue. But for and I'm looking at the slide that's right here in front of us, slide 6. And I've enjoyed hearing the discussion around, what are really the underlying issues that's driving the sworn police to have that increased vacancy rate. But it's clear that in 2019 through 2021, it was sort of a steady state. And something in 21, whether it's COVID or some other indication, has driven that vacancy rate to almost a 4% increase from 2021 to 2023. And Ms. Simpson, you had answered one of my first questions already when you mentioned that our rate of entrance growing is not addressing the rate of exit, right?
That's correct.
So do we also have a percentage or some idea on what that rate of entrance needs to be in order to, sustain and stave off this vacancy rate?
Yeah. So I don't have a numerical metric, but I would refer back to what the city manager stated, and that is one of the metrics is we have to increase our recruitment pools. So we have to increase the number of recruit classes that we offer during the year, and so the police chief has initiated that. And then, the other thing is this trend is not unique to Charlotte. This trend is occurring all over the nation. So from some of the employees, they're changing careers. So what we are trying to do is how do you attract this career to individuals? And as was shared earlier in a different presentation, I think it was Mr. Bergman, the other thing in North Carolina is that there have been some additional regulations put in place in this state, and those regulations become considerable factors when you have to implement them, and it impacts your hiring. So there are many forces and factors out there. Some of them are in our control and some of them are not. But to your point, how do we spend time to do a deep analysis on how we're going to reverse this trend? And that is, I would say that is a concern.
And then, Ms. Anderson, what I'd say is, we don't know exactly how many will resign, of course. We don't know how many we will be able to get through the academy. But we have a pretty good idea of when police officers are going to retire, just the way that it works with the pension system and a separation allowance they get. So we'll take the opportunity to try to give you some models on the number that we would need to hire based on high resignations, average, low, and you can kind of get a feel for where it would take for us to start reducing the deficit.
That would be very helpful, because I feel pretty strongly that, you know, the increase that we've seen from the 911 calls, and congratulations on that, is a result of us shining a light on it and putting specific energy behind it. And I understand that, you know, sworn police is an issue across the country, and we hear it every week when we're in neighborhood meetings and out with constituents. But I think we have to put all of our energy into this specific area so that we can address it, because it's a huge hill that we need to climb. And if we don't do it, especially with our rate of growth in general in the city, it's just only going to continue to widen if we don't figure out a way to stop the bleeding and plug this hole here. So our sworn fire is a space where, you know, it's a highly sought after job in the entire country. And you talk to the firefighters and they love their roles, they love their job, and there's a pipeline. And I'm so happy that it's at zero here on this graph, but we have to figure out a way to bring our sworn police closer to that sworn fire. And I understand that there's a difference between the retirement structure, but we still need to address it and put our energy behind it. Thank you.
That's a great point, and I know at one time, you know, CMS had a school for people that wanted to be in fire or police, and that school didn't last very long. And I think one of the problems that we have is we have to make that career valued enough that you can see it when you're making that choice. This doesn't require a college degree. It would be great if you had one, but it doesn't require one. And we ought to be out talking to 17 and 16 and 18-year-old people who don't know about this. And I think sometimes the chief has done a great job going out to certain schools, but getting them into some kind of understanding of what the job is, giving them some opportunity to touch it and feel it and make a decision of whether or not. I think we're missing a huge gap when we talk about young people that may look at this as a career. But
I agree.
I want to recognize now Mr. Bakari.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're so welcome.
No, seriously, thank you.
Very much so.
Very, very appreciated. So I'll start with just one comment. I don't know exactly the full scope of what you're thinking when you say cost of growth, with an asterisk next to that. However, the way I think about something that's achievable in that, in fact, we've already started doing, and that is the infrastructure initiative that we started. It literally, like, it's maybe a little smaller in scope, but it is absolutely executable. It's going to be hard, but the work we already did was spend a bunch of time with staff. You were part of that as well, and others. And then we started, first step was define all elements that make up the word infrastructure. And then we went to the second step, where that's about as far as we got, prioritize what we think the top elements are. So what those next steps were supposed to be were then go and calculate where the policy says this is acceptable today and how far we are in that gap and how much that costs. And then what will ultimately be found there is, where have you not defined where that policy is? So we need to set policy. And then the last step, which I think So that's the cost of like catching up. The cost of growth then, an easier way, or within a hard topic, is then looking at the 2040 comp plan, the UDO, all the places where we said, well, yeah, you're going from R3 to N2 or, something big. That's the growth we're anticipating there in the planning process. So how much does that infrastructure cost to keep up with that? So to me, that was the entire exercise that then, much like we know a dollar-based gap, because we've calculated units of affordable housing, we know on average how much they cost, so of what it would take to solve affordable housing, which is one component of infrastructure, we would be able to do that for all infrastructure and therefore understand the cost of growth. I think there is nothing more important this city could be doing than that exercise right there. It's literally why we're in business. It's hard to do, but we, for some reason, haven't been able to tackle it, and our last effort kind of just, stalled out. I think that is the most important thing you can figure out and incorporate into the community area planning process that is taking place over the next 2 years. So that's just something that hopefully will be helpful there. What I really want to talk about, though, is we've talked a lot about police and what can we do. And maybe, obviously some of it's budget and pay, but some of it is budget and other things that we should be doing that we've learned. We've heard that a lot. I really think, on the pay front, I've talked to a lot of police officers in the last several months to prepare for this moment, and I've got a list. And staff, I'd just like you to jot down the topic headers. I'd love to talk to you offline, but I want to get this into the flow in front of my colleagues as well, because I think this is what we should be considering this budget cycle. So on the first one, just on pay, the explanation for some of those numbers and the question that was raised about 2018 and 2019, 20, and what was going on there. Well, one big thing was when we came on board, we did a 3-year massive effort to raise up salaries. And it was a big commitment. The manager, staff, we all did it. And that was a big deal. And I think the numbers kind of show some of that. The problem is that brought Charlotte to the median. Right? That just brought us up to the middle of the pack from based on where we were there. And then that kind of stopped. And then the pandemic and the protests and everything else that happened at that point has kind of pummeled us from that point. So what I think we need to do is do that same 3-year exercise and commitment to get us back to the head of the pack. And there's some specific things I can think we can do. It doesn't have to be across the board. We can look at certain pay levels. At the level 6 or 7, we know that from 1 to 6 or 7 is the time we'll lose most officers. But once they get to a level 6 or 7, that's where it's quicker they're more likely to be retained because they lose when they leave. So figuring that out is important. If you look at Tampa, where we just were, they just did an 18.5% pay raise over 3 years that took them to the top of the nation, not the median. And if you look at our salary differences, in Charlotte, a first-year officer makes around 52 grand. There, first-year officer makes 72 grand. At the top level here, someone makes around 100 grand. That's a career officer up at the top. There, 117. So it's really important that, we recognize the good work we've done, but also recognize the fact that that just got us to the middle of the pack. And that's really important for our officers at the time they're in. The other thing is total department strength and the vacancies. These relate to response times, everything we've seen before. And I think we need to make sure we're looking at hire backs, at other numbers that might appear to us that the situation is better than it is when they're not actually regular full-time officers that are careerists. They retired and they're kind of coming back. There's a lot of kind of noise that can create in the overall number, and that directly relates to morale, because if they are being asked to do the job of 2 people because we are understaffed, that's obviously a part of the situation. So then I'll go through these quickly, but there's some now that are not just salary based, but many have budget ramifications that I think make sense. And I'm just going to go through these. We'll talk more about them later, staff. Overtime. Several of them have mentioned having it, but then losing it, particularly due to like mental health leaves when they need a day off, right? They've gone through a crime scene investigation for 4 days straight. Well, they know if they take a day off the next day, because of, mental health issues that go along with some disturbing things they see, they'll lose that overtime. That's not a healthy thing to have to worry about there, especially on the broader mental health need that we're seeing across this job profession. PTSD is another one. Particularly, we've seen some in the retirement areas that were noted by Officer Stepp in the news in the last couple weeks. We need to make sure that we're funding those who have served us and that are now experiencing this stuff after they retire. The mental health stuff is critical when we look at other things other than salary that we should be doing to make this career of choice, an employer of choice. Retirees after 2009, we know that we've done this citywide. They all lost kind of city health insurance. We get the reasons for that, understand. We have to recognize that cops are a special class, though, that go through wear and tear that not everyone does, that go through mental and behavioral health issues through their career that not everyone else does. That's a big deal that we have to make sure we consider. Workman's comp, I don't know how many of you know this, I learned about it recently, is a terrible process. Right now, we go through a contract of a company called Sedgwick, and basically, the process, the payback, all the things like that are really, really difficult. And again, it's just the headwinds and friction of an employer of choice that wouldn't have. Outer carriers, budget item here. Patrol officers don't have them. Most others do. This is something where it's, other than it being hot, things they have to wear inside, inside their vests and are uncomfortable. They're not safe, right? As safe as the level 1 knife-only protection is what a lot of them have now, and they can have much more capabilities there. Take-home cars. We've discussed this in the past. We've looked at it. Now I believe it's up to division levels, and many of them don't get to have it. We need to get and analyze that and roll it out. We're cutting crime reduction units due to the staffing shortages. That's something we need to make sure we've got the right units doing proactive work so that people aren't always doing reactive stuff. And then I've come to understand that in our hiring process, we still have a COVID booster requirement, that if you don't have the booster and a proof of that, it's a condition of employment. And that just seems pretty wild to me, given where we are right now in this pandemic. I mean, you could have had COVID and have the antibodies in an antibody test, but just because you don't have a proof of a booster, it's a non-starter for you to even apply here. So these are the examples that I just wanted to share. I'll go into more detail later with staff, but these are the things you've asked the question, what can we be doing in pay and budget, but also in other budget and non-budgetary items to improve morale, to fix this situation? I mean, there's a solid list straight from their mouths. From my mouth, from their mouths into my ears. Okay. Thank you for that very, very insightful clarification, Mayor Pro Tem.
Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like for us to spend not a lot of time, but just remember what our priorities we stated in January 30th and 31st, particularly the new initiatives. So, City Manager, we're talking about staffing. I think we need to talk about staffing and compensation for our workforce development new initiative. In my conversation with National League of Cities on best practices, most of cities across the country have been successful in workforce development, have an average annual budget about $500K, and that covers about 3 staff positions. Then the other two that I think are extremely important as well is our small business, minority business development. I knew there was some conversation about it at a retreat. And at one time, we were having a conversation partnering with a group called Operation Hope. Operation is a great organization out of Atlanta, and they have a very successful office here. And so I would like to see, as we talk about minority business development, how do we accomplish some of the goals we would like to from a standpoint of staffing? And last but not least, this one I don't know, but we said another key initiative with digital divide, and I don't know how we are staffing the digital divide. So let's make sure we spend some time, we can focus compensation and staffing around our 3 new initiatives. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, Ms. Watlington, and we'll wrap this up for us.
Sure, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, we will not, you go ahead.
You sure?
Go ahead, Mr. Graham, I did not know that
Mine will be very quick. I just want to emphasize since we're talking about staffing and salaries, and I don't want to get this point lost, Mr. Manager, is the code enforcement, which I think is really, really important in terms of my perception, and you guys can say I'm wrong or right, that they're understaffed in those areas as well. And as we continue to focus on our quarters of opportunity in particular, the number of calls we're getting from residents, small business owners, et cetera, in terms of the quarters themselves and the neighborhood that surrounds them relating to issues relating to code enforcement, I think it should be noted as we kind of take a look at the budget and the number of staffing there. I do, and I did hear what our HR director said in reference to solid waste, DOT service, heavy equipment, water, those hourly employees. And so obviously, I think we ought to, again, focus on them. I certainly understand, comprehend, agree with many of the discussions we said around law enforcement officers. I think that's really, really important. That our hourly employees, those who do the work, and we all work, right? That those that literally do the work, I think we need to make sure that that they are rewarded, that they are recognized, and that they that we find a way to make sure they show up to work the next day. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Watlington, wrap this up for us.
Sure, thank you. Two things, yeah, because of the last couple of comments, I did want to go back and touch on something that is a smaller thing and as it relates to scope of everything, but I did want to touch on it. I know I've had some conversation with some of us in regards to our direct report pay, and I do think that we're at a place where we need to start thinking about how we can restructure that compensation to match a little bit more, frankly, of what I see here in regards to our staff throughout the organization, from a market-based or market-based base pay with a performance bonus incentive. And I think that gives an opportunity for us as council to really tie compensation for our direct reports to performance with the city, as well as give an opportunity or be cognizant of what is existing in the market. We want to stay competitive with our direct reports, but we also want to make sure that we are directly tying the outcomes with the city with performance pay. So I just want to put that into this conversation because I know we're having a conversation about the broader organization, and I think we've got an opportunity to update and modernize, if you will, the way we compensate our direct report. So that's that. The second piece I wanted to discuss was this cost of growth. I know we're having this conversation. I'm glad we're having this conversation. I think if we focus on the cost side, not necessarily trying to quantify the benefits of growth, but the cost side, we can really almost do away with the forecasting piece and really just take a historical analysis, right? We see every year, year over year, how our population grows and how our spend has grown in our OpEx and in our enterprise budgets. We know fire, it's based on response times. Those response times are based on population. So we can reasonably correlate the cost of growth when it comes to hiring additional firefighters, and then from the capital side, buying trucks and all of those kinds of things, building new fire stations. We can draw the line pretty, I don't want to say easily, but pretty straightforward between the cost of growth as it relates to fire. When it comes to water, I mean, you have to calculate your load, and that's based on GPM, which is based on your water fixture units, which is based on the building code and how many toilets and sinks and et cetera, you have to have in these buildings. So there's a very clear tie between population and what's being built to the size of your piping and the cost of laying that piping, right? So you can understand your capacity very clearly, I think, there. Police, same thing. We said 911 calls. We know that they're related to population. We know how many officers are needed for these 911 calls. We know what their fully loaded costs are. We know what the cost of equipment for these officers. And at some point, you have to build another precinct. So I think if we look historically, we can, for a lot of these infrastructure things, the data is available. And certainly, Ryan, I want to hear your feedback. Road maintenance, even when we talk about how often we have to go in and repave the roads. We know that's a function of how often people are driving on them. We know that we are taking volume to capacity measurements on a yearly basis on a lot of these roads. So I think that it's a lot more straightforward on the cost side, particularly for infrastructure. So when I say cost of growth, that's what I'm thinking about. And I think that we can use the historical data to then project forward what we think it would cost.
That's the first time I've ever heard another council member say volume to capacity ratio.
Are you serious?
It's awesome.
Well, so I think that we've got a good jump on it, and I think that you can get to a place where you can say for every 100,000 people, we can expect this capital investment, we can expect our operating costs to go up, our variable costs anyway, to go up by this much. But I certainly want to hear your feedback on that, Mr. Budget Director.
Okay. I think that takes us through the first section.
So can I see if we can do an audible right now?
Yeah, let's go do
Okay,
an audible.
So
yeah.
we have our friends in from the MSDs, and we also have financial partners, and we also have water and stormwater. So Mayor and Council, typically we take all the enterprise funds and have them on the same day. And so if there's any change to the agenda, I would recommend that we move water to the third workshop, even if the workshop has to be a bit longer. And that way, we would have cats and water and the airport all together.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for the work.
That's not water.
Thank you. That's the HR team. Thank you. They weren't leaving because they were running out of the room, right? Okay, so.
I don't know if that works for.
Fire's about to take off too. Let's see. We're just gonna call you out, Chief. Okay, so.
Does that work?
So water can move to, we can either come an hour early or stay an hour later. We just have to decide that for the third, huh? Go to 6?
No, April 6th.
April 6th, yes. Okay, yeah. I guess what I'm asking is, what order are we going to continue in?
So
We get to the,
we'll have Marie Harris DJ us through this process, which is a little bit different since we're going to bring up some of our executive directors here to explain how it's going to work.
okay.
Yes, good afternoon. And before we get started with the formal presentation, at the request of the Budget and Governance Committee Vice Chair and the committee, we've asked some of our MSD partners to come and give a brief few-minute overview and field any questions. And also in your packet, your hard copy packet a couple of weeks ago, and also in the packet today, you have their overview update memos for your reference as well. And we'll just go in alphabetical order first. So we'll start with Center City Partners and Michael Smith, please. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, members of council, and Mr. Manager, pleasure to be back with you. We're proud of our 45-year partnership with the City of Charlotte. I think it's served our community incredibly well. We were formed in '78. We operate as a 501c4, not-for-profit. And the vision back then was that we needed to have this vibrant center city that would serve as the foundation for a thriving region. That was the vision then. I think it still holds today. We have an incredible pipeline of new investment in our community. There's $6.9 billion in the pipeline, and that includes both under construction and what is planned. That's 7.2 million square feet of office, a couple thousand hotel rooms, and 7,700 new apartments. Really responding to the folks that continue to select our community to move here and to join what we've all built together. We're a respected and trusted economic and community development organization. Our work is about creating a thriving and beloved place with opportunity for all. We continue to act as a convener on the top issues of the urban core, from growth and homelessness to public safety and community activities. We envision and activate strategies and actions to create a welcoming and equitable, economically vibrant, culturally rich, and beloved place for all. There are 4 MSD districts that we serve, 1 through 3 in Uptown, 4 is in the South End. We also do targeted economic development work with partner organizations in the historic West End when invited, like Historic West End Partners and JCSU. We seek to serve our property owners, our large and small employers, workers, residents, visitors, entertainment, arts, and cultural venues, sports teams and venues. We also have 2 other not-for-profit C3s that are part of our work and part of our team. And one is called the Community Trust and includes things like Joy Rides, which is our bike share program, produces Charlotte Shout, Thanksgiving Parade, the Small Business Innovation Fund. The other C3 is the Market at 7th Street, which is an incubator of small businesses. It is value-based. It has a preference for small businesses that are women-owned, minority-owned, or veteran-owned. Our combined staff is about 33 plus 14 Center City ambassadors. We lead with research and urban design. We do economic and community development. We own the master narrative, the communications and strategic communications for our Center City, programming events, and more. If you're looking, as you look to the things that we're focused on right now in FY23 and FY24, return to office is absolute top of the list. It has such an enormous impact on the small businesses, on the safety of our Center City, the experience of our guests. So we are working through research, strategic communications, economic development initiatives, working with our private security and CMPD. Captain Balamucky and Chief are incredible partners, and I can tell you that our partners are grateful, and they've been great partners throughout this. Economic and retail development initiatives, efforts around exploring how we're going to work with the private sector on some of our legacy buildings, looking into things like conversions into workforce housing, more residential density in our Center City. There's a strategic effort we're working on called the North Tryon Tech Hub, which is looking to be the economic underpinning of our North Tryon Vision Plan. We've got great partners, including your economic development partner working on that, and UNC Charlotte, and private employers as well. We work to support and incubate small businesses through efforts like our small business ecosystem granting. Thank you for the partnership in that. The Small Business Innovation Fund, the Hive, and the Market at 7th Street. We are working on our strategic initiatives that we co-developed with you, like the 2040 Center City Vision Plan, North Tryon Vision Plan, South End Strategic Plan, a Home for All, which is the housing and homelessness strategy that we led the creation of, but we worked with you, and it's been adopted by Mecklenburg County. The Rail Trail Vision Plan, public safety, diverse programming, expanding the reach of our ambassador program. We're exploring the creation of a nighttime economy strategy and manager. We feel like this is something we've seen very effectively done in other cities, so we're studying it, and that would be a partial FTE for us. Glad to talk more about that. Intense focus on sustainability. We just made a really great hire in Dr. O, who's got a background in sustainability. We'll be partnering with Sustain Charlotte and with Envision Charlotte. All of our destination events that you guys know, from Camden Commons and South End, Shop Small Saturday, New Year's Eve, Thanksgiving Parade, and Shout. Thank you for the partnership in Charlotte Shout. It is such an unmatched investment in our arts community, and that will be the first 2 weeks of April. I know I'm moving quickly, but telling the story in 5 minutes is really hard. We're proud of the partnership that we enjoy with all of you and with your teams. We work through so many of your divisions to try to fulfill what I just shared. We're a small staff. There's 26 of us when you include the other not-profit agencies. You know, our total budget, the MSD side of it, is hold on, let me get to it. There we go, $6.8 million That represents 61% of our revenue. Will be between $11 and $12 million in total when you include the other money that we raise through our other nonprofits and that work that we do. I'm glad to answer any questions and pardon the pace.
Are there any questions for Mr. Smith? Did I see your hand? Ms. Johnson? Ms. Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Smith. It's a wonderful working with your organization, with you and Maura also.
Thank you.
You all do great work. I want to thank you. As some of you might know, Monday is the city's celebrating Brain Injury Awareness Day for the 3rd year. And Maura has been very, very helpful in working with the community uptown and helping me get the skyline
Excellent.
To be lit and green as an observance. So just constantly, anytime I've reached out to your office and Maura, you've been very responsive. Important work in uptown, and just thank you. And it's a pleasure working with you. So thank you.
Thank you. It's our honor to serve, and this all comes on behalf of our board as well, that remains so committed and grateful for the partnership.
All right. Any other questions? Mr. Graham?
No, just a comment, and he skipped over it very quickly, but I don't want to lose the emphasis of a home for all. They did a really, really good job in terms of helping us work through the homeless issue in Uptown Charlotte. A lot of people just see the office building, but a lot of people live in Uptown. And so I just want to, again, thank you for that work there. And it's not done yet, but certainly public safety and a number of other issues are some things that they've been keenly focused on as well. So just want to appreciate the effort.
Thank you.
Mr. Bakari?
Yeah, just, we're highlighting all your awesome stuff, and I will highlight that tech district uptown. I don't know that a lot of folks know what that is yet or what the potential, and there's a ton of work to do, but it has the potential to, if done right and all the stars align, to be maybe the most important thing 50 years from now that ever happened to uptown, let alone the city, if it's done properly. So
Look forward to working with you on it. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Smith, thank you for the report, and I think we'll now go to Adam Rue from South Park.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Great to be with all of you and reporting for the first time on our progress since Council established MSD 6 last year. If Center City Partners has a 45-year history, I think we might be closing on 45 weeks together. So we're crawling, but I'm really excited about the progress that we're making in South Park. A couple of quick thanks. Councilmember Bakari, thank you for your assistance as we've gotten this district formed and off the ground. I cannot say enough about the partnership that we enjoy with city staff across the board. Just an incredible partnership from every department. Ryan, thank you. Tracy and her team in economic development have been outstanding. And I just want to emphasize the relationship and the partnership that we share with the city working together for this important regional activity center in South Park. I want to share just a couple of quick insights about the South Park district that underscore that point, its importance as a center of commerce for the city of Charlotte. South Park is home to more than 27,000 jobs in the MSD, and 3 of the region's 17 Fortune 1000 companies are headquartered within the MSD. Those are Nucor, Coke Consolidated, and Albemarle. There are over 350 shops, restaurants, and service providers, again, within the boundaries of MSD 6, and many of those are small businesses that were started and grown here by Charlotte entrepreneurs. We are so excited to support those small businesses through marketing, programming, and small business support. South Park is also a destination for people from around the corner and around the country. Last year, 3.3 million people made about 20 million visits to South Park for non-work purposes. We had visitors from all 50 states, including, I learned this week, 3,500 people from the state of Alaska who spent some time and money in South Park last year. And we're really proud of this point that the segment of visitors who travel more than 150 miles to spend time and money in South Park is currently running a monthly average of 146% of pre-pandemic levels. Really, really pleased with the strength and the resilience of our small business economy, particularly in South Park. As I outlined in the briefing memo that I provided in your packet, we're currently focused on 4 big strategic priorities: identity, experience, long-range vision, and mobility. We have a lot of work to do on those, but I'm excited about the progress that we've made over the course, excuse me, of a few short months. The first week of April, we will unveil to the community a new brand for the South Park District that we're going to use to promote and position South Park for the future. The new brand speaks to consumers and to companies, and it will highlight the warm sense of belonging that we hope people will feel when they're part of our community. We're excited to announce a weekly event series at Symphony Park called South Park After 5 that will begin also in April, featuring live music, food trucks, and interactive art. That will be free and open to everyone. That event starts on Thursday, April 20th, and will run for 6 consecutive weeks this spring as we try to activate and animate that really important public space in South Park. Also this spring, we're going to kick off the first ever South Park Vision Plan, creating a blueprint to guide future development in South Park, beginning with the community's values and aspirations. We're going to identify big moves that we can make in South Park on community assets like public space and transportation innovation, and we're coordinating with the planning department to make sure that our plan is well connected and aligned with the concurrent community area planning process and UDO implementation. We're working with our partners in the public and private sectors to develop a phasing and implementation plan for the Loop, which is a 3-mile urban trail that connects and creates great places in South Park. The Loop advances city priorities around mobility, public space, and equity. It's got a ton of potential to transform South Park, to make it more walkable, to make it more connected as a place. And we're really excited about where we're headed with the Loop in partnership with the city. We've also convened the South Park community already to seek their feedback and insights about how we can serve our stakeholders, and that's included a really great partnership with CMPD around public safety. Want to commend CMPD for working with us and with our business community to ensure that foundation of public safety, and a partnership with the South Park Association of Neighborhoods, which many of you are familiar with, represents residential interests in the broader South Park area. As we've been out building this organization, building our board of directors, and building a staff, we're now, as of next week, we'll be a team of 3, including me, full-time staff. We've been talking a lot about this idea of connectivity, and that our work in South Park is about building connections in our community, about relational connectivity among our stakeholders and our small businesses, physical connectivity that knits South Park together to make it a more complete place, and emotional connectivity so that the South Park District resonates with people in a lasting and meaningful way. We're excited to continue that partnership with the city and look forward to doing that again in the next fiscal year. Thanks so much. Happy to answer your questions.
I just make a quick comment. Adam, we obviously are all in the district very grateful that you're there. And while there's a lot of work to do, a lot of progress has been made. For all the colleagues and the folks watching around town who maybe haven't had a lot of updates, they've been building the foundation, building the plumbing out of what will be a long-term organization that has the type of impressive portfolio that you just heard from Michael Smith 45 years later that takes time to build. But I think the most important part is South Park before Adam and before this MSD was a group of very good people and neighborhoods and businesses that were completely disconnected and there was no organization. And now that is starting, and that could potentially be a very powerful thing. So we're very grateful to the work that is just getting underway and have a lot of high expectations from you, Adam. Don't go to sleep. Do not go to sleep.
Thank you, and looking forward to continuing continuing our partnership.
I have a quick question. Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Adam, thank you for that update.
Absolutely.
Very excited about what you have planned for South Park. It's clearly important to the city of Charlotte. I have a question about, in the packet, you assumed a 4% growth rate, just year over year. I'm wondering, given everything that you laid out as it relates to priorities, is that the right number? Is that an aggressive number, or is that a lenient number? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that would actually be us. So the way that the municipal service districts work is they get the value that actually occurs on the property tax side. So all this really is an estimate from our economist on the average growth rate over the last 4 years. In a revaluation year, that's the way it works. So we reconcile each year based on what actually happened the previous year. So they really get the actual results, and it's not really a projection that they make.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was my only question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Go to our next member of our group. Keith Stanley, this is your first time? Come on up. Keith is representing University City Partners. Keith, thank you.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, thank you. To the council members, thank you. I don't have the 45-year or even the 45-day. I think I'm at 65 days as president and CEO of University City Partners. But I'm glad to be here. I just want to say a few things before I jump into my presentation. I want to thank all the council members I'm meeting with. Been really helpful opening up and just showing me the ropes in this beautiful, diverse, dynamic city. Also, Michael Smith, if he's still around, has been absolutely great. Also showing me ropes and making the connections. And I definitely want to give out to Sherry if she's still around. She's been amazing helping me with some things. And also Toby, who's here because he's my pitch hitter, just in case if I mess something up. I'm gonna call him up, y'all, just let you know that. Real quickly, I just want to say, as outlined, I do have hard copies just in case if you need, and I brought these hard copies because they have my contact information for those who don't have my card information. As outlined in our mid-year objectives report, University City Partners have 19 goals. As we cover those goals, we talk about workforce development, transportation, planning and development, safe communities and great neighborhoods in University City's 7.9 square miles. There's quite a lot there. A couple of things that highlights I just want to include is us creating and sharing press and news releases about a number of our businesses as we open up, working with all our businesses, including Black and brown businesses. You may have heard of Whitney's Widow Wonders, Harold's Ice and Fire Bar, and our University City Axe House. As we continue supporting these businesses. Also, we're investing in wayfinding signage. So you see those beautiful green and orange signs all across University City. Thanks to Toby leading the charge on that. We're still working on that, knocking that down. And also, just something which is important for us if we talk about connectivity, transportation, is the completion and implementation of the first mile, last mile strategy. And I think that's key in partnership with CATS. With microtransit starting in spring of this year and much more. Once again, connecting our employers along with the Blue Line. And just want to highlight that as outlined in our University City Partners mid-year objective report, 68% of those 19 goals, 13 of them, directly impact equity. Once again, workforce and business development, transportation and planning, and development, safe communities, and great neighborhoods. That's it.
Okay. All right, questions or comments for Mr. Stanley? Ms. Johnson would like to talk with you.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to officially welcome you to District 4 and to the city. I look forward to working with you. University City Partners, they do amazing work in the community. And I want to publicly thank Toby Holmes also, who I've worked with since 2019-20, and he really carried or led the organization in the interim. So I look forward to continued collaboration. As you know, the District 4 is growing extraordinarily, and I look forward to your leadership. I look forward to your leadership as well, Toby. I see your email. We'll talk, right? And just thank you for all that you do. Thank you. Bye-bye. I mean, not bye-bye, thank you, you know what I mean? Okay, go sit down.
All right, anyone else? Mr. Grant?
Well, I want to
Mr.
welcome you to
Graham.
District 2 as well. We share him, and I had the opportunity to meet with him for about an hour, I guess, 2 weeks ago. I came away from that meeting extremely excited for the possibilities of University City, the future under your leadership, as well as Toby and the board of directors over there. And I'm really excited about the growth plans for the area and looking forward to seeing what you will do. He's also a Kappa man, for those who may need to know that, Mr. Manager. And so we'll make sure that he is indoctrinated into the city at a very high level. Thank you.
Oh, my goodness. Okay. Thank you very much. We're really excited to have you. Thank you for bringing your family with you.
Yes.
And the opportunities that you're going to create for all of us, really. So look forward to seeing you the next time.
Thank you.
Okay. All right.
All right, so one more thing. We'll have Marie Harris come up and walk you through the financial partner applications. We'll move pretty quickly because the info is really on the slides that are in your packet. And, we encourage you to get a hold of us at any time with any questions you'd like answered about the financial partners.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon again. And like Ryan said, all this information is currently in your packets as well. And just as a reminder, financial partners are organizations that the city partners with, kind of as extensions for services that help us to move forward your key initiatives or your strategic priorities. So they're partners in moving and advancing the strategic priorities and serving the community. And when we look at the financial partners, we tend to categorize them based on funding. So we have discretionary revenue funding, we have dedicated revenue where you just heard from our MSD partners, and there's also, and we'll get to that Charlotte Regional Visitors Association, and then we have housing partners. And the housing partners are typically grant supported or also receive housing allocations. So that's just kind of typically how we structure them into categories. And then for our housing partners, a lot of those have strict grant regulations, and the other ones are specific housing allocation contracts. But for the ones that aren't housing contracts, we also have strict requirements as far as performance measures. Each has performance measures, and they report on them at mid-year and year-end. And for the current financial partners that we have now in this fiscal year, within your packet, you'll see their mid-year reports. And then our CBI team works with each of our financial partners at the beginning of their contract to look at opportunities, at the beginning of the contract year, to look at opportunities for certified MWSBE utilization. And then we also have equity measures, and Mayor, I believe you asked for those. Those are specifically printed out in your packet as well. And I will note those are still a work in progress. It's only like the second or third year maybe, so those are definitely still a work in progress. But each of our partners have those, and they report on them twice a year. And then for discretionary funding, just as a reminder, you funded just over $1.2 million in the current year budget, and then increased requests are 130 from our current partners, and then just over $500,000 in new requests, and we're going to get into the details of that in the next slide. So for our current partners, these are all discretion. Again, these are discretionary funded partners that are funded this current year, and then what they've asked for in the FY2024 budget request. And then also you can see the increase requested, and there's detail also in your packet for any increase they requested. And then our new ones, we have Achieving Success on Purpose, Carolina Metro Reds for the Struggle, Legal Aid of North Carolina, and Race Matters for Juvenile Justice that would be new applicants for this year. And sorry, I misspoke, because Achieving Success on Purpose also applied last year but was not funded. And Race Matters for juvenile justice, the city has currently partnered with through operating budget, but it's more applicable to the financial partners process. And then for our dedicated, you heard a lot of detail already from the MSD partners. And again, to Ms. Anderson's point, we have projections in here, but then we true them up once we get the true numbers from Mecklenburg County, so that they don't project their own estimates. And then for housing partners, these are ones that are handled through Sean Heath's team and the rest of his team. And most of these are grants, federal grants, and they have those requirements, and a lot of those are formula grants, so the numbers are based on the federal grants. And then we also have some of our innovative housing dollars that are allocated through these. And that's it. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Madam Mayor. Actually, this is by far the piece of our conversation thus far that captures my attention the most. And I just want to lift up, actually, it's really a comment more than anything else. I want to lift up the partner funding request and the new discretionary funding partner requests. I'm excited about all of these because they're doing great work. So for me, the way that I see what we do, it depends on partners like this. These types of partnerships are essential to what we do. And I think the more that we encourage this type of partnership in our communities, the more capacity we can have as a city. So particularly, I want to raise up For the Struggle Incorporated, because I've actually been in that space. And what they are doing over there is absolutely outstanding, and so I think I would like to, make a personal call out to, all our neighbors, and we have so many people just like this in our communities that have great ideas. They just don't have the funding, they don't have the resources. And I'm familiar with this one in particular because they started, kind of seeded with United Way funding, another
Where
great
are they
partner.
working at now?
Huh?
Where are they working?
Who?
For the Struggle.
They're on, oh, don't you start. Look, I'm over here just calling out your area. Well,
I know, don't worry. I don't even know why you said anything or looked that way, so just look over there and keep going, okay?
I'm not with you right now, Malcolm.
Really,
But, so shout out to District 2, my colleague, Mr. Malcolm Graham, because of the great work that's being done over there on the west side. Even, like I said, this is just, I could go on and on. Like, this is where I light up, the West Side Land Trust, what they've done over there. I am just in awe of what I've seen our community members do. And like I said, this is where the real work, this is where the rubber meets the road, right? This is where, when it comes to the work that we do, this is where we partner with people who are passionate, who touch our residents every single day and make a difference in their lives. So shout out to everybody on this list, Alliance for Education, Bengali Women, the CRBA, CBI, My Brother's Keeper, Safe Alliance, Treaty Charlotte, National Institute of Minority Economic Development, Achieving Success on Purpose, Carolina Red, Metro Red, For the Struggle, Hoot Hoot, Legal Aid of North Carolina, Race Matters for Juvenile Justice. Like these are the people from our communities who have great ideas. They've been funded. They're doing outstanding work, and I just want to raise that up and say congratulations to them, on these requests, and I look forward to continuing to watch them grow.
Any other comments on this one? Okay. Is there anything further that we need to deal with today, Ryan?
No, we have a lot of information. We will try to get you as many answers as we can before our next workshop, which we will now add water to. So in all seriousness, we might want to plan on staying a little bit later on that one.
Yeah, please add to the time so that we can actually get it done. Otherwise, we'll have to have another workshop. And I think that your schedules are busy and the staff needs the time to react to what we're saying. Okay, Ms. Smith, anything to say or anything? I'm sorry. Ms. Johnson?
I do have one question.
Uh-huh.
So Councilmember Mayfield wanted me to ask the city manager. Is he gone? I'll ask Debbie Smith, okay. About the direct housing initiative. She's spoken to him about a direct housing initiative and if a funding request needs to be submitted today during this process. So she's been working with Mr. Jones on a direct housing initiative.
Direct in small d or capital D? You know what I mean? Is it a?
I do.
Is it, yeah.
And it's probably a capital D, but the description is direct housing purchase from local real estate investors, bank foreclosures to either keep residents or long-term renters in their home.
I got you. Sort of like what we're doing with Noah's. We buy the entire apartment community. Do we buy other houses or other types of units? So that's
Foreclosures,
okay.
yeah.
I
So
think
it's a
that would
housing
fall under the
initiative.
50 million that we have, and because that's where we've been doing those purchases from in the past. So I think that would qualify because it's kind of the same thing, keeping people in their homes.
Okay, and then can I ask a question about the financial partner request?
Sure.
Okay, so I noticed, where is it? I noticed there's a huge difference between the proposed amount for Dream Key and for Crisis Assistance Ministries. Crisis Assistance Ministry is a huge resource in our community.
Right.
They have the free store and the crisis and the, even if it's, and I'm not sure where they are with utility assistance, but I know that working with the population I work with, Crisis is an amazing partner, and they help individuals with immediate needs. So, and so does Dream Key. I'm not taking anything away from Dream Key, but this is almost 10, let's see, hold on. No, it's not. Okay, so look, let me see, hold on. It's quite 6 times, I was looking at the last year, it's 6 times the difference. So I would wonder if there's an opportunity for more assistance for crisis, or if there's a justification or reason that there's such a difference.
Yes, ma'am. And if you're referring to last year, Porton noticed, it was across the bottom, that $2 million was allocated to them specifically to help house City of Charlotte employees. So that's money that we partner with them on a specific project, not part of their regular. So, and if you're looking at this year, a lot of their funds are federal grants, and that's where they get that from. So it's a specific federal grant.
I do think if this is still accurate, Crisis Assistance does a great job, and they're a really good partner when we call on them. They help us with keeping people in housing, just like you say, even acquiring the housing. But they do have a different foundation base that when it was started out, it was a faith base, so they have a huge amount. I don't know what the numbers or the percentages are, but I think it would be helpful because they do submit all of their revenue sources to see what their overall budget is and where it comes from, and then we could probably discuss it even more.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
I know that Duke Energy funds them as well, so.